we have a moment to have a discussion about the importance of innovation in the growth of businesses today. According to my friends over at Accenture, they found 84% of today's executives in America believe that innovation is a critical component to their future success. Meanwhile, 62% of fast-growing and new businesses plan to spend money on initiatives intended to boost innovation. And according to the Business Consulting Group, 30% of all businesses today in America include the importance of artificial intelligence in their innovation plans. Meanwhile, Accenture also tells us that 44% of all small and medium-sized businesses believe that innovation is a key factor to making future decisions, compared to 58% of larger companies were actively engaged in innovation initiatives in order to grow their footprint. On the consumer side of things, Accenture says that 84% of today's American consumer believes that innovation is a key factor in a company's ability to sell them a product or a service. For my friend Nick Jain, he's committed and passionate about igniting all things innovation. He's the president and CEO of a company called IdeaScale. It's a leading innovation software company. IdeaScale is the leading global mechanism for many global organizations when it comes to innovation, including NASA, Comcast, NASCAR, and Doctors Without Borders. Jain graduated from the top of his class at Harvard Business School and holds a degree in mathematics. From Dartmouth, he enjoys playing poker, running, and traveling with his wife. He joined me this week to talk about his upbringing in business, life, and to talk all things innovation. So, without further delay, I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. Diversity of approach and perspective can breed innovation. So I began my conversation with Jain asking him to define his version of a definition of what diversification in business really means.
Sure. So look, our fundamental product relies on people coming up with cool ideas, sharing each other. It's a very social way of interacting. And great ideas come from people all across the world. So when we build our software, we try and make it very easy for people who have different backgrounds to participate. And that could be people who don't speak English, or people who are introverts, people who aren't great writers. And this is true of all good software companies. Good software companies try and make their software accessible to people who have different abilities or different inclinations. A good example of this is like well-run software companies make their software accessible for people who have visual or auditory difficulties. And that's something, we spend a lot of effort in ourselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, I know that you have quite the personal story yourself. I know you were raised by a single parent and you come from India, and you also have had your own sort of life story of experience that guides the work that you do today. So I'm wondering if you can share that with me this morning.
Sure, yeah. Look, I was from the age, my parents were poor immigrants to Canada, and so they sent me back to be raised by my grandmother when I was between age 1 to 5. So I actually didn't see my parents till I was about 5 years old. Um, and that's influenced me in a few ways. Number one is it's the scrappy immigrant mentality, right? That my parents were able to make such a sacrifice to give up their child in order to create a better life for themselves and their kid. That's extraordinary. Um, Number two is I grew, when I was growing up in India, I didn't have running electricity, or I had running water for 2 hours a day. I had electricity that would go on or off, no air conditioning. A lot of things that we take for granted here in the West did not exist when I was growing up in India. And that meant you just have a greater tolerance for being inconvenienced, right? So a fun example is when I often go to New York or Washington D.C. for business or internationally, and people say, "Why don't I travel in first class or take fancy trains?" It's like, no, I'll take a bus ticket because for me that's not discomfort. That's just something I'm used to. That allows me to be kind of much more resilient in the face of adversity. And then third is a value system, right? When you grow up in particularly in Asian culture, you really value education, not only as a way to get a good job, but rather because it's important in and of itself. Being educated is a moral virtue.
Yeah, and Nick, I know that you graduated at the top of your class at Harvard Business School, my friend. So tell me how that sort of set your professional story on the track that it is today. How did your time at Harvard influence you, my friend?
Sure. So candidly, I don't think it actually influenced me that much. I think, obviously, look, Harvard's a great business school. It's got a great brand. You build a lot of really cool relationships there for people who are influential or come from influential families or may themselves be influential, a few decades from now. So it's a great way to build relationships. But I don't think, candidly, my time there changed who I was as a person or the trajectory I'm on. It will offer me fuel later on in my career because I can call up a bunch of important people. But the actual experience there was kind of unchanging, as I would put it. It did not really influence me in any material way.
Fair enough. And you've had experiences in a number of different industries, my friend. So I want to talk to you about the idea of adaptability. And I know you've spent some time in industries such as men's fashion and trucking, my friend. So what does that mean to you to have diverse experiences? And how do you define adaptability in business? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Sure. So, yeah, I've worked in a bunch of different industries over the course of my career. And in moving from, let's say, trucking into software has required me to adapt in many ways. Firstly, it requires you to learn, work with different types of people. On average, people who are in, let's say, the finance industry or the tech industry are different than people who are in the fashion industry or in trucking. So you have to adapt your personal style. Secondly, there's content adaptation, right? When you show up to a new industry, you have to learn a lot about that industry. So when I showed up to men's fashion, I had to learn a whole bunch of new terminology. I had to learn about cultural differences and what the business was because it's a fundamentally different business than, let's say, finance or trucking. Um, so those are difficult changes to make, right? They require a lot of effort that they require you to put in a lot of hours and make conscious efforts to learn, right? It's like imagine you switch your major in college from English to math or from math to art. You have to spend a lot of time catching up because you're behind the curve. And if you're not willing to work for it, you're going to stay behind. So adaptability is important both as a state of mind, but then also like if you want to adapt, you need to be willing to put in the work to become adapt to whatever new circumstance you're in, and that can be both professional circumstances as well as changes in personal circumstances. Moving to a new city, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, I'm also curious to ask you about of the evolution of AI and how artificial intelligence has really affected the way that we do business and the way we educate our kids. So how do you think the advancement of AI has sort of influenced the business and educational world, my friend?
Sure. So that's a really big and complex question. So I'll break it into two parts. Number one is kind of how AI is influencing us generally, but secondly, for the education of our kids. So I think everyone's been really excited about AI for the past 2 years or so, but what I think very few people appreciate is what changed in AI is not the actual AI itself, but how we communicate with the AI. So we've had AI in our software for, 10, 20, 30 years, depending on how you define it. What changed 2 years ago with ChatGPT and the large language models is all of a sudden normal people who are not software engineers or data scientists can talk to AI in just their normal language, whether that be English or Japanese or French. And that made the technology much, much more broadly accessible to everyone because if you can speak or write in English or Chinese or any natural human language, you can now all of a sudden talk to AI without knowing how to code, without knowing any data science, without knowing any algorithms. And that made the technology much more expansive because if all of a sudden everyone can interact with the technology, that technology can be useful to everyone, not just software engineers. So that's the biggest change that's happened is like all of a sudden we have this technology that's been around in some way, shape, or form for as long as 30 years, but now everyone can use it. Now everyone has started using it for things as important as deciding emission or strategic discussions at boardrooms, all the way down to hey, what birthday gift should I get for my wife? On an educational level, I think it's going to, we're obviously just seeing the first generation of kids grow up with this technology, but I think what's going to happen, and this is my kind of forecast, is that it is going to fundamentally change what skills are required. So when I was in school, we had to learn grammar and spelling. That because that was a useful skill because there was still a lot of stuff that you would write either digitally or with your hand, and you had to know how to spell. That's not a useful skill anymore. Same with however, semantics perhaps is a more important skill because you need to know how to communicate in logical phrases, whether you're communicating with another human being or with a computer. So I think the advent of AI is going to dramatically reduce some skills that are totally worthless now. It is not useful to learn how to write in cursive or to spell. It is still very important to know how to do semantics. It is important to know how to do a new skill has evolved called prompt engineering, how to engage with these AI systems and where they fail or succeed. So that's the big change that I think is going to happen for education for children is that number one, certain skills are going to be useless. Number two, certain skills are going to become more important. And number three, certain new skills are going to be required for the next generation of children
Well,
that didn't even exist.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, my friend, and I'm curious now to dive into Idea Scale, which I know is your business, and you've found a way to harness the power of AI and innovation to push the boundaries of technology, my friend. So, both in business and in life, my friend. So, tell me about Idea Scale and why the business is so important to you.
Sure. So IdeaScale is a really cool business. We've been around 15 years and we are the most powerful innovation management system or idea management system in the world. We've been around, as I said, 15 years. We have hundreds of clients around the world, huge companies, Pfizer, Comcast, huge government agencies, US Post Office, Transportation Safety Administration, the guys in the blue shirts at the airports. And our software is often the brains that power their innovation programs. Like, how do they deliver better services, better products, better customer service to you every day? Our software is the reason there is the way they're coming up with ideas on how to do that and then turning those ideas into reality. So they affect you as an end citizen or an end customer. So I think I've been here now about 2 years as CEO, and it's such a cool experience because I know that my software is helping other organizations make a difference and get better each day. And that's really important because each day you want your fast food burger to be a little bit tastier, a little bit cheaper. You want your airport security to move a little bit faster while not sacrificing security. You want your drug companies to come up with better drugs. And being able to participate in that and power that is such a great feeling for me and for the team here at IdeaScale.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Nick, I'm curious on a fundamental level. When we really dive into the idea and definition of business innovation, depending on what field you're you're in, business innovation can have a different definition depending on the business. But fundamentally, I'm curious to know what's your definition of business innovation, and how do you think businesses can apply that effectively? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So I'll give two definitions of business innovation. The simple definition is just doing things better. And that's very, very abstractly defined. It's very simple. It's not super useful. But then I would say there's three types of innovation. Number one, there's incremental innovation, figuring out how to do something that you're already doing slightly better. Next, there's parallel innovation, which is figuring out how to do something that you're already doing, but in a very different way that has its own pros and cons. An example could be you can ship sushi, or so you can ship food on a train, on a plane, or on a bus. Each of those have pros and cons, right? Sushi you may want to put on a plane, whereas canned tuna can go on a big ship that takes months to cross the ocean. And then third is orthogonal innovation. Orthogonal is a fancy word that means at 90 degrees or not related to anything that you're doing. And that could be a fundamentally new technology or new way of doing things that has nothing that enables you to do things that weren't even possible before. An example is sending is what's called solid fuels. If you were burning gasoline or a liquid fuel, you could not send a spaceship up to space. But with the advent of solid fuels, they could burn slowly enough that you can send spaceships up to, the moon or Mars, get them in, go explore the universe. That's something that enabled something fundamentally that was not possible prior to the advent of solid fuels.
Yeah, and tell me, I know you also believe that larger organizations tend to struggle sometimes with innovation. So tell me, how do you think organizations who aren't sort of vaulted into the innovative age can really develop a sustainability factor when it comes to innovation? What are your thoughts there?
A sustainability factor? What do you mean by that?
In terms of building a culture of innovation,
Ah,
whether it can help them drive a culture of inclusion or just driving a culture of innovation more broadly. What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So look, as you said, large companies struggle to remain innovative. And there's kind of two big reasons. Number one is when you're large, you've already made it, you're successful, you're a $1 billion company, you're not going anywhere. You don't have that same hunger or fear or paranoia that a small organization does, right? A small startup, if they're not out there selling and growing their company, they're going to go bankrupt. So large organizations, they're less hungry, less fearful, less paranoid, less aggressive than smaller organizations. That's why a lot of innovation tends to happen in smaller organizations rather than larger. That's number one. Number two is large organizations often set up just in order to exist, they have to set up processes and bureaucracy to continue what they're doing well. But processes often limit you to do creative things because they're standardized ways of doing things. Standardization is the enemy of innovation. In order to overcome that, any large organization needs to use what I call the three-legged stool of innovation. You need three things in order to develop a continuous culture of innovation, a continuous and self-sustaining culture of innovation. Number one, you need to have the right people. Number two, you need to have the right processes and incentives. And number three, you need to have the right tools and technology. And if you're missing any one of those three things, your stool may balance for a little bit, but it's eventually going to fall over. You can make a stool balance on two legs, but eventually falls over with a gust of wind. So again, you need the right people. You need people who want to be innovative and creative. Number two, you need the right processes and incentives. If you're not incentivizing people and rewarding people for doing the right thing and for creating new things, then you are not going to have that culture of innovation. And number three, you need to give them the right tools and technology. Think of this like a runner. A runner can get fast without having a pair of shoes, but it's a lot easier if you give them a pair of shoes and a coach. And obviously, as a plug for myself and Idea Scale, we're really focused on that third tier. We'll help out on the first two, but really our area of expertise or excellence is on that third tier. We make the best in class software to enable organizations to innovate.
Yeah, and how do you think we can develop a culture of both positivity and production in business? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So positivity is a very, very deep concept, right? There's a lot of academic research on this, and I forget the gentleman who won a Nobel Prize about 10 years ago, but the idea is you want to have human beings react both when there's positive incentives and negative incentives, the carrot and the stick model, right? If you give only carrots, their people are not as productive, and if you give only sticks and threaten people to fire them, that is also not productive. You need to actually have both sides. You need to reward people for doing well and penalize them for doing poorly, and that becomes a really positive thing where people know that, hey, if we're all contributing and all rowing in the same direction, we have a unified mission. Yeah, and it's really important to have that unified mission, because once people are attached around a unified mission or aligned around a unified mission, and they have the right incentives to guide towards that creates a very positive culture, a happy culture, um, where people can be working their butts off, and there can be a little bit of fear, but there's at the same time this grand unifying mission with a lot of positivity around it. Um, yeah, that. What was the second half of your question? The first was around positivity, and the second half was what?
Production. How can we marry the two to run a successful business?
Sorry, I don't know what you mean by the word production in this context.
In terms of making sure that we're using time efficiently while also being positive in business. So I guess, how can we use positivity to get an increased return on the investment to be productive?
Sure. So the cool thing is people work best when they are happy and when they are motivated. What's that old famous quote? You know, the day I found a job I loved, I stopped working,
That's
right? So
exactly right. Yeah.
if you create a culture where people are, again, they like what they do, and that could be because you changed the job or because you hired the right person for the job, they're going to be way more productive than someone who's showing up to earn a paycheck. Because the worst type of employee is someone who is showing up to earn a paycheck, because they don't actually enjoy what they do. They will not take pride, and that's not just true for white collar workers. Like, you want, whether you're so I, for example, I do a lot of house maintenance. I enjoy doing house maintenance, and not just because it's my own house, but because I take pride. It's fun to do work with my hands. So I take a lot of pride in the high quality of my home repairs. And if you're doing so that's true. I'm much more productive because I care about the quality and I care about the quantity of what I produce. So that's the trick. If you want really productive workers, either pick workers who are right for the job, or change the job so it is right for the worker pool or talent pool that you have access to. If you're not able to do either, really, people are not going, you can't offer people enough money to be awesome. People will be awesome because it's something deep, deep in their souls, and you can only change the person or change the job. You can't incentivize them with external or extrinsic motivations.
Yeah, and Nick, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Statista reported that the number of people rather in business using AI tools globally surpassed 250 million in 2023, and is expected to double, which is more than double rather than the figures that we got in 2020. And my friend, it's supposed to surpass over 700 million people, according to Statista, by the end of the decade. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on those findings and what you think of that, my friend.
Sure. So, look, any great technology gets adopted, and due to two things. Number one, how good the technology is, how much productivity it adds, and number two, how easy it is to access. AI, we can argue about whether it is good or bad, but it's certainly good in many contexts. It allows you to, as a simple use case, it'll do all your writing for you, whether that be writing books or writing emails. And number two, because it's free and accessible in any language to anyone who's got an internet connection, it's super easy to access. So AI is really cool because it's potentially very powerful, and it is cheap to free for many people as long as they have an internet connection. That means that adoption curves will be very, very fast. You can think of it like a cell phone, right? Cell phones were very, very powerful technologies, but because they enabled people to talk to each other really quickly. Unfortunately, they were expensive, right? Cell phone adoption What is it? Cell phone can cost anywhere from $100 to $500, depending on how fancy a phone you want. So it's even today, smartphones are not accessible to large portions of the developing world population because they're expensive. But guess what? You can be someone in a developing country who's earning $1 a day, and if you can go into an internet cafe, you can use AI for free. And that's really powerful. So the adoption curve will continue to grow simply because this technology is so cheap to access nowadays for really anyone in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, for your perspective, I'm curious, how do you define effective leadership in business? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So I would say effective leadership can boil down to one of two definitions. Number one are the outcomes achieved? And that's number one. And then the second definition, which is slightly different, is are the outcomes achieved through using the people that you lead? Okay, through the power of. So the difference is definition one says, look, as long as the goal was achieved, I was effective as a leader. It doesn't matter how I did it, whether I did it myself or through my people or through the organization or through whatever. Or definition two says an effective leader needs to be able to get the outcomes, but through leveraging his or her team. I personally am open to either definition because I don't think that, or I really focus on achieving the goals through the, regardless of the methods through which they're achieved, as long as they're, legal and ethical means.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, based on your personal story, I'm curious to get your motto for overcoming adversity and celebrating prosperity in life. What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So overcoming adversities, there's a really cool piece of research on this that the U.S. Military Academy at West Point did a decade or so ago. Called They measured what drives people to succeed, and the number one characteristic that they found in their research, personality characteristic, was what they called grit. It's your ability to face and remain resilient in the face of adversity. That could be a bad exam score. That could be being passed over for a promotion. That could be the passing, one of your loved ones dying. And they discovered that people who are able to be resilient in the face of adversity tend to do much better in life, not only financially, but also from a happiness and life fulfillment perspective. The good part of their research suggested this mattered. The bad part suggested it was basically set by the time you were in your early teens. So if you want to be successful in the face of adversity, really, like, it's too late for you and I potentially, but it is certainly possible for our children, right? So for those of us who are having children, a characteristic that we really want to show them is make them face adversity early on, right? And teach them how to overcome adversity or stay strong in the face of adversity with grace. And that'll allow them to have much happier, more fulfilled lives over time. That's kind of my point of view on adversity, which is that develop kids with grit.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, how do you think we can develop strategies to make AI companies more profitable, in your opinion, and how can we use AI to accomplish that on a daily basis? What are your thoughts there?
So it's funny that you asked me this because this is like what I do for a living, right? A lot of technology companies are run by visionary product or technology people. They're extraordinary at the product or technology side, but that's where their skill set lies, not in running companies. What these companies should do is hire professional CEOs like me, because what I excel at in life is how do you run a company profitably that creates value for its customers, for its employees, and for their shareholders. That's my skill set, right? So what these companies, these AI companies need to be doing is hiring professional executives, right? Either hire me or someone like me, because there's just in the same way that if you want your house fixed, you hire a carpenter or a plumber or a general contractor. You don't, try it yourself because you may be a great, let's say you're a great computer programmer, but you may not be great at fixing houses. The same is true at leading companies, that you want professional executives or professional leaders because that's a skill set just like any other. So that's tip number one. Go hire a professional executive, whether that be professional CFO, professional CEO, professional CEO. Go hire someone who's great at running companies. Number two is The way to make non-technology companies use AI more effectively to become more profitable, I'm going to give a kind of tongue-in-cheek answer, which is true, is go ask the AI, hey, how can I make my company more profitable? Because it'll come up with great ideas on how to make your company more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, I've got a couple questions left for you, but
Yeah.
first I want to ask you about using AI as a competitive advantage tool for folks with disabilities. You know, Nick, we just finished October, which was a National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So, how do you think we can use the evolution of AI to close the labor gap for individuals with disabilities? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. AI is, look, the great thing about many technologies that have come into play over the last several decades is they have made the world more accessible for people, right? 150 years ago, wheelchairs were not accessible, and today wheelchairs are reasonably accessible to many people in the developed world, which makes people who have, let's say, physical disabilities able to easier transport themselves, locomotion. Um, AI technologies, I think they have kind of three main benefits, or the current generation of AI technology, specifically large language models, have three benefits for people with disabilities. Number one is they can communicate in nonverbal ways. So these AI technologies can be trained to interpret your finger strokes, or imagine you can only use one hand or a couple fingers. They can be trained to turn that into a communication signals interpretable by anyone else. That's number one. They make it easier to communicate. Number two is they allow you to frame your thoughts more cogently. So there's some people who have great thoughts inside their head, but they're not great at communicating them. Maybe they don't have a great vocabulary because they miss those educational opportunities, or maybe that's just not the way they're neurodivergent and their brain doesn't form or turn complex thoughts into great written or verbal language. The AI can make you just a more effective communicator. It can turn those great thoughts in your head into stuff that is valuable to other people. Um, Number three is it is makes it easier for you to engage with technology. So a good example of that is screen readers and accessibility tools. So if you scroll back, let's say 10 or 20 years ago, it was really difficult for a lot of people with visual disabilities to interact with websites or read a book. Today, you can open up any book and an AI will read you the book. So even if you have no, if your eyes don't work or you have visual disabilities, you can now listen to a book or listen to a website. And that is something that no one had to train, right? You didn't have to have a very expensive professional reader read it or record an ebook. It can all be done by AI. And this is incredibly powerful because it's made receiving information rather than transmitting information also much easier for people. So, and that's the core of engaging any population in society. They need to be able to communicate information out and receive information in, regardless whether that be a physical or sensory disability.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, selfishly, I wanted to ask you this question. You know, outside of hosting this podcast, I also do some motivational speaking, and I'm always looking for ways to communicate with people who are looking to book speakers. And I've used AI in the past to hone my communication skills to be more precise and direct, my friend. So I'm curious, how can we use the power of communication and AI to be better lead generators? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So almost all marketing and sales tools nowadays, or especially the leading ones, are involving AI in some way. That could be on an analytics basis or on an LLM basis. So I think marketing tools are already aggressively adopting generative AI tools or LLM tools. Um, so what I would say for anyone who wants to use AI for lead generation is go look at the best sales and marketing software out there and go explore their AI features because all these new features are coming out almost every day and you need to play around with them. So for example, the CRM that we use, they're releasing new AI features every day and I'm trying to play around with them to figure out how they can help my business do lead gen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'm curious to end by asking you a two-part question. And And I'm curious to get your thoughts on the future of AI, but I'm also curious to ask you about your own personal and professional legacy and how you want your legacy to be defined. My friend, what are your thoughts there?
Sorry, what was the back half of your question? How do I want what to be defined?
Your legacy, my friend. How do you want your legacy from a personal and professional standpoint to be defined?
Sure. So I'm a very simple person. I like building things. When I went in high school, I was I worked during the summers as a carpenter because I liked building things. Today, I still spend a bunch of time. Actually, I like two things in life. Number one, I like building things, and number two, I like learning. So whenever I pass, what I would love my family, my friends, my colleagues to remember me at is someone who worked his butt off to build things, whether that be houses or companies, and someone who truly loved learning for its own sake. I'm happy being remembered for just those two things.
Yeah, and what about the future of AI? Where do you think the industry is headed, my friend?
Sure. So look, long term, or well, let me rephrase. The holy grail of AI is what's called artificial general intelligence, an AI that can think for itself and act in a multidisciplinary approach. That's where we're all headed towards, whether it be Google or ChatGPT or Anthropic or any AI research in the world. That's what we're headed towards as humanity. Artificial general intelligence, an AI that can truly think for itself. There's a lot of things that we need to accomplish in order to get there, right? The first is multimodal input and output. A human being can interact with eyes, they can interact with ears, with their mouth, with their hands. AI needs to be able to do that, interact multimodally, both input and output. Secondly, it needs to be able to understand complex and ambiguous issues. And number three, it needs to be able to reach a decision combining both logical and moral factors, and I guess logical, moral, and emotional factors. All of our technology, our development in AI is going to progress along those two vectors. Number one, more multimodal input output, so you can interact with it the same way a human being would in the real world, or the same way human beings interact with each other. And number two, making it smarter along making its decision making smarter along three dimensions that I mentioned: logical, moral, and emotional. And all of our researchers on that second vector, logical, moral, or emotional, are making these AIs smarter to be more emotionally engaging and to make them have moral concepts, as well as for them to interact more logically. We very much focus right now, the news focuses on the logical aspect, but there's some really interesting developments on what is happening to the internal emotional computation or internal moral computation of some of these AIs, and that research will start impacting us in society with it probably within the next couple of years in really fascinating ways.
Absolutely, my friend. And finally, tell me, my friend, if people want to get connected with you personally or idea skip, what's the best way they can do that?
Sure. So let's start with IdeaScale. So our website is ideascale.com. Our software is completely free for teams or organizations less than 100 people. So I encourage people to just, use our software. It takes 30 seconds to set up, totally free, no downloads required. That's ideascale.com. For folks who want to get in touch with me personally, best way is through LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain. Just find me on LinkedIn and DM me. I respond to 100% of messages. So would love to hear from your audience.
Fabulous, Nick. Well, I want to thank you for engaging in conversation and for your contribution to moving the needle of progress forward when it comes to business innovation and everything in between, my friend. I really enjoyed our conversation and want to thank you for making Idea Scale and business innovation your passion and your purpose and for joining me this morning. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me on. It's been an honor and a pleasure.